She is from Finland, where she's a professor of information studies at Åbo Academy University. And she'll be talking about youth, which is a large reason why we're here today. And you can use the mouse or this.
Thank you very much for the presentation and good afternoon. I would also like to add that my co-author Eva Reina is also here in the room. She is representing the European Youth and Information Counseling Agency. And what I'm going to present is a study, a survey that is part of an Erasmus project, an ongoing one, on youth information, and with the aim to increase the quality of youth information services, applying user-friendly methods, and also involving peer-to-peer aspects. So the actual survey is based on a previous one from 2014. We conducted it late last year, and we had 18 participating countries in Europe, and we got almost 3,000 responses, which is a really good result. And what we asked about was their experiences of youth information services, about areas of information needs, what sources they prefer, how they evaluate information and different information mastering strategies, such as information avoidance. The most typical respondent in this 3,000 sample is a female. She is 12 to 18 years. She lives in large or medium-sized cities, and she is studying in middle school. I could add that she is also probably Lithuanian or Spanish or Portuguese, because those were the biggest groups of respondents in this sample. But of course there are representatives of other age groups and so on, but the most typical. And that's of course important to know when analyzing the data. So there's a lot of interesting findings in the survey, but I will only mention a few. One important thing to note is that young people prefer still face-to-face youth information services as their most preferred channel of information. Of course, followed by online sources and social media. A reason for that is that they feel that youth information counseling gives them or extracts information from the various sources, which is difficult to navigate, and also translates difficult information that is otherwise difficult to understand, or to make sense of what is disinformation or misinformation and so on. Then there's a kind of a challenging issue with the fact that young people perceive themselves as really good information seekers, and also good at evaluating the information. When you ask directly that, are you good at seeking information? On the other hand, they still also identify difficulties in validating online information. So there is something kind of ambivalent going on here, and it would be really important to research this more in depth to understand the information behavior of young people on a deeper level. Then it was also interesting to note that about 25% of the respondents identify in themselves that they avoid information if it's difficult or negative. And this is, I think, something that we perhaps don't talk so much when we talk about media and information literacy, this part, that what are the consequences of avoiding information that could be important for different decisions in life. Also, shame and stigma as possible hindrances to important information. You identify an information need, but you don't act upon it because of shame or negative feelings. And that is also something that we should perhaps look into more when talking about media and information literacy. So more in detail about these figures related to these findings is that almost half of the respondents voiced difficulties in evaluating the reliability of information. Over half expressed that they would like sources where information does not require further verification. Around half believe a lot of information they access is unnecessary or irrelevant. And also over half underline that information they use is not always complete and reliable. So in addition to the survey, we also conducted a small foresight pilot with 3 different studies with 3 different target groups. Young people participated in future youth information camps. We had experienced youth information workers in a scenario planning webinar, and youth work experts participated in a Delphi survey. And the task with this was to portray future youth information behavior in 2030. What are the challenges, what are the changes, also related to youth information counseling. Now again, there's really a lot going on on this in the results, but I will highlight 3 things. All 3 groups, both young people and those who are working with young people, think or foresee that our information landscape will only be even more complex in 2030, and we will still have a lot of issues with information overload, handling privacy, and so on. And for example, especially young people think that for education will be 100% online 2030, which of course underlines again that we need good information and media literacy to be able to be part of the educational system fully. Then they were all also very concerned with the digital divide and diversity on a European level. They all think that the group of young people will be much more diverse than we think they are or will be, of many different reasons. And the digital divide is also a concern, something they are worried about, that it's not only because of the obvious that not everyone has access to technology or the newest digital tools. It's a lot about attitudes and interest and motivation, or lack of it, that will lead to a growing digital divide. But also poor reading skills. So our basic literacy is also a concern. And this is on European level now, where we kind of think that we all are very literate. And then as a third thing, they also emphasize that everyone that is working with young people and supporting them in developing their information and media literacy should be many steps ahead in their information and media literacy. So that should also be emphasized in the future, or already today, of course. So, to summarize, information mastering strategies of young people is really, really a complex and diverse matter, and we need a lot of research and collecting practices and experiences in this area about youth information behavior to better be able to support their information mastering or media and information literacy. And youth information counseling need to explore and apply new innovative ways, taking the new technology, artificial intelligence and robots integrated into the face-to-face information counseling to build young people's autonomy and resilience. So this is what we have been working with. There's a lot of more information about this study, and you can find it online. I realize this is not very information literate to share a super lengthy links, but you can be socially literate and be in touch with me or Eva, and we will guide you to the survey report or the executive summary that describes how the foresight methods or study was conducted. Thank you.
What did we do before email addresses, huh? So let's take a look at another perspective. And in this case, it will be Japan, Hosei University with Dr. Yun Sakamoto. And you have, right, and he has a PowerPoint as well, so we're going to get that. Yes?
Where? I don't know where. This one? Maybe.
So while we're setting it up,
No. This one.
Dr. Sadamoto is a researcher for lifelong learning and career studies, and he's also president of the Asian Pacific MIL Center. So he'll be talking about the present situation and MIL, so how they are addressing today's situation.
My name is Jun Sakamoto. I'm a professor of the Librarian Training course of Hosei University in Japan. First, I'd like to present a situation, so-called fake news. In other words, disinformation problem situation. And secondly, our practice, including a video exchange project in Japanese digital environment. After the US presidential election in 2016, the Japanese media covered stories about the fake news in the US and Europe. At the beginning, the Japanese media and even researchers looked at the situation with indifference. Gradually, they are paying attention to the problem of disinformation. On the social media in Japan, the motivation behind it came from the establishment of the non-profit organization on fact-checking, the fact-checking initiative Japan in June last year. There would be a reason that Japanese media is not paying enough attention to problem of fake news in Japan. It is not only that some of the Japanese fake news come from politicians' lies, and often they spread them by themselves, but also some of the mainstream media tend to surmise government intent and are lenient in criticizing them. So, for example, during the Okinawa gubernatorial, this picture is NPO's picture. Please look at me. This picture. For example, during the Okinawa gubernatorial election last month, some politicians who belong to the ruling party intentionally spread fake news or hate speech to injure the opposing candidate. One of the politicians who are involved in it denied his responsibility of reality checking. And many fake news sites on that election appeared and spread disinformation. Do you want to know the result of it? Oh, despite this situation, opposing candidate won. In the background, the administration lies blatantly to the public sometimes and attempt to cover them up by controlling bureaucrats and ordering to falsify official documents if it's necessary. Some of the mainstream media which are close to the administration avoid criticism of them. And online far-right racist group provides them support on social media as provocators. Nevertheless, most of the educators, administrators, and researchers, including librarians and the media literacy field, don't have an interest in this serious problem. Especially in the library food. I'm a library food member. They think it doesn't have anything to do with them at all. In the media literacy world, teachers and researchers are rather interested in programming education. Many of them consider the concept of media as non-human agents, that is to say, media devices. Therefore, they always focus on how to use media devices, such as tablet PCs, in schools. I surveyed a sampling of the online news and hate speech checking skill at some secondary schools and my college students last year. And I wrote an article about it for the Merit Years Book 2017, but not published. I don't know why. As I expected, students don't have enough skill to elaborate online information, and they are very susceptible to hate speech. The most serious problem is that the teacher and the librarians and the researcher ignore it, but ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away. Many of Japanese teachers and administrators don't consider children's behavior on social media as an issue of citizenship, but just personal moral issue. This is a big problem in Japan. They haven't addressed this problematic situation outside of schools. The policies that they adopted were just about prohibiting bringing smartphones into schools or asking parents not to allow children to use them at home. But it doesn't seem to have an effect. In such a situation, I tried to introduce fact-checking practice into our librarian and librarian teachers training classes in my university since last year. And I did spotting fake news workshop at the junior high school, adopting the Japanese version of the crack test as information literacy education, which is popular in the US for spotting fake news in schools. This is a picture in my workshop. Yes, this is my class in junior high school. So that test is come from the American Library Association. In March, I had another workshop about almost same topics with not only the crack test, but also the Japanese version of 5 key questions of media literacy that come from the Center for Media Literacy in the US. And I think it is a good way to use the crack test in judge truth or falsity, but it's not enough to teach students media literacy skills such as question how different people understand the message differently, or what lifestyle, value, and point of view are represented in the message. These questions are important for the cultivating critical media and information literacy competencies. We might well be able to claim that it is called the simple way of the media and information literacy education. But it is not yet enough. This month, we had a lecture and a symposium titled Media Education in the Age of Digital Capitalism, inviting Professor David Buckingham from the UK as the event of the UNESCO Global Meal Week in Japan. He pointed out that we must think about not only promoting media education, but also changing the media which is based on digital capitalism. I agree with him. In the era of disinformation, we must engage in not only creating media and information literacy practices, but also changing the media environment that is based on digital capitalism with journalists and fact-checking organizations and citizens. That would be a huge project. We already have developed a relationship with them. Big social media companies such as Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple are adapting technologies to strengthen their power. We need to have critical thinking skill and abilities on AI or virtual reality technologies to counter them. In addition, I think not enough. In addition, we are engaged in the plan to have a multilateral exchange video literature project with schools in Nepal, Cambodia, and in Niger, China, Vietnam, and the US using a video sharing server. This is a very new server. We call it OA Tube. It means Open Academic Tube. We believe that we need a relationship of trust and intercultural dialogue as an MIL project. Now more than ever. So this is a QR code of my video. So we don't have enough time to show the video. Please check the website. Please watch. Thank you very much.
You understand? Okay. Our next speaker actually is a pair of speakers. Yes. And they are from, actually they're originally from Turkey and Germany, and now are students in the UK. So we have Ms. Pauline Turkman and Friedrich Rothe, and they have a special project at St. Andrews, and you'll also be looking at the research behind it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pauline Turkman, and this is my colleague Friedrich Rothe. We are from the University of St. Andrews, and we are very honored to be here today.
So, as a winner of the Global Challenges competition at our university last year, we formulated a proposal aimed to tackle the phenomenon of disinformation. And in the absence of a centralized international approach, which can coordinate existing approaches, we propose the creation of a global initiative on disinformation, which we'll be launching tomorrow at the Youth Agenda Forum in Riga. So throughout our research on the topic, we came across many existing approaches in the field, which we broadly categorize in 3 sections: technological solutions, educational solutions, and legislative solutions. And today we will be mostly speaking about technological solutions and educational solutions.
I am going to jump right into the topic and say that while disinformation has always existed, our capabilities today to automate the production and circulation of disinformation has never been so easy and so cheap. Bots, for instance, are often automated accounts that post more than 50 times a day on average, and they can be used to rapidly disseminate disinformation. More statistics to give you some scale on the technological side. For the US presidential elections in 2012, the computational propaganda project based in Oxford, I quote, found that professional news content and junk news were shared in a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning that the amount of junk news shared on Twitter was the same as that of professional news. Meanwhile, in Germany, this ratio was 1-to-4, and in France, it was 1-to-2 in the last presidential elections. Now, this does not mean that Europeans are more critically engaged with social media. It only means that the machine of producing disinformation has not yet spread as much here. So while these bots can rapidly disseminate disinformation, they are also used to generate ad revenue in terms of directing traffic.
Yeah, and we think that the motivation to create disinformation for financial gain is actually a very important issue that needs to be addressed in this context. And one technological player who has already addressed this problem in the past is Google. And Google worked on the prevention of revenue flows to the owners of bad sites, scams, and ads by banning approximately 200 publishers from its advertising network, AdSense. So as good as this sounds, there is some problem with that. And this Google's approach has a disadvantage, which is a disadvantage that is common to many technological solutions, namely that they're very vulnerable to quick, swift countermeasures. So in regards to the Google case, expert Claire Wardle noted that while disinformation creators experience short-term losses in their profits from revenue, they quickly return to profits to previous level using other ad networks that were willing to partner with them. So we see this as a clear indication that there is a need for more research on this topic and to understand the business model of disinformation and potential ways to address it. But leaving that aside for a moment, let us talk quickly about augmented and virtual reality. So at Facebook's developer conference last year, Mark Zuckerberg showed that with augmented reality technology, we can easily add filters to images or videos, altering the way we present and perceive reality. To give a trivial example, Mark Zuckerberg added more steam to the image of his coffee. Now, why is that relevant to disinformation? It is relevant because already journalism are beginning to experiment with transferring news through virtual reality.
And although now they appear harmless, can you imagine what the darker versions of augmented or virtual reality will be like, and how convincing and real disinformation will feel then? And so faced with this terrifying prospect and an awareness of quick countermeasures that usually develop with technological advances, as well as the underlying financial incentives, it becomes very clear that there's a strong need for educational solutions and MIL. So for educational specialists, they need to remember that audiences are most likely to interpret information with a background context of their own personal, political, and sociocultural experiences. This makes it very difficult for anyone to accept that their information or interpretation of information is simply wrong, of which MIL community must continue to be in awareness of. With disinformation and calls for critical thinking, more people now distrust what they read and seek guidance from third parties like fact-checkers to make the judgments for themselves. Although this recent craze over fact-checking appears to be in the right direction, it still does not prevent the creation and distribution of disinformation. In fact, according to an article titled "The Science of Fake News," the efficacy of fact-checking websites may even be counterproductive, since when fact-checking websites repeat false information, even to denounce it, they may increase an individual's likelihood of accepting it as true. In light of this problem, MIL has a crucial role in educating individuals to think for themselves and to make the right judgments for themselves. I will briefly highlight two areas of importance here. While engineers and software developers need to be critically and ethically trained on the potential consequences of what they can produce, it is also important for the youth to know exactly what terms like disinformation, virtual reality, artificial intelligence really mean. But what may be more important than that is to be aware of the future capacities of this technology. MIL and ICT that deals with such concepts should therefore ideally be a mandatory course at primary and secondary schools across all national curricula. Yet even educational approaches have their own limitations. They can neither fix the fact that disinformation travels 6 times faster than real news on social media, nor can they overcome our psychological predisposition towards accepting disinformation. For example, across all educational levels, 50% of the participants of a fake news game could not identify disinformation. MIL is certainly a necessary condition to finding a solution to this problem, but it certainly is not a sufficient one.
So when we then looked at technological and educational solutions in our program, we realized that while technological approaches target the production side of the problem, that is the production of disinformation, educational approaches mostly seek to curtail the problems through addressing the consumers of disinformation. And that is why we think it is so important to bring together technological approaches with media and information literacy. And this is also more or less what we try to do with our Global Disinformation Initiative. And we will tell you tomorrow way more about it at the Youth Agenda Forum, about what our project exactly entails and how we're going to do it. But to give you a very briefly overview, we want to have 3 sections for our disinformation initiative: a research section, education section, and a participation section. And while the research section for our initiative will be based at the University of St. Andrews, we'll be also reaching out to the Millet Network and other research partners for support in that endeavor. In terms of education, we'll be working together with GATMIL, and more specifically, GATMIL Youth, to further media and information literacy on the topic. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the participation section aims to bring all relevant stakeholders from technology, education, research, governments, and the public together to exchange ideas and enhance communication between different approaches. Therefore, we like to make at this point an invitation to all of you for your participation and partnership in this project.
So please do feel free to approach us for a chat or for our emails if you're interested. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.
So earlier in this conference, you heard we're supposed to leave the area, the environment with more hope, and I think that's been accomplished. And it's wonderful to see youth that are actually, doing great action, research action, so I feel better about the future. Would you be surprised to know that these people are majoring in politics? Okay. So on that note, for our fourth speaker, we're coming back to the Baltics with Mr. Viktor Denisenko. And he is an assistant professor in communications, including journalism, just very close to here at Vilnius University, and will further continue with this trajectory.
Thank you. Welcome back to Baltics. It's nice to be here in Kaunas, neighborhood of Vilnius. And today my topic is experts' view to a place of media literacy in the system of resilience to propaganda, Lithuanian case. I will try to present research which was made 1 year ago. It's part of international research about resilience of societies in our part of Europe. It was made together with Ukrainian partners, Ukrainian Prism. So, but when we are talking about topic of media literacy, often we could find two general approaches. But media literacy, it's what it's about. It's our understanding of mass media messages, how to read newspapers or internet or watch TV and be safe. And another approach is how to use new media and in creative way, in the best way. But today, when we're talking about informational security, in fact, we could find one more possibilities to look to this issue of media literacy. How Edward Lucas and Peter Pomerantsev mentioned in analytical research which was named Winning the Information War, they pointed that the concept of media literacy has long been seen as synonymous with education, what I was mentioned. But what media literacy education means is changing, and it is moving out of the classrooms and into communities. What it means? When we're talking about Lithuania, for example, and I think that we could talk not only about Lithuania, but about Baltic states, maybe also Poland, about this region, the approach to media literacy directly connected to our geopolitical situation. And I think that the biggest challenge to approach of media literacy here in Lithuania was events in Crimea, 2013, hybrid warfare. And it was very important because what hybrid warfare means. 4 years ago, I'm still worked as a journalist, and I saw and I feel this fear in Lithuanian society, tensions in society, because yes, we are part of NATO, and from military point of view, we are safe. But hybrid warfare, it's not about war, first of all. It's about specific operation, and it's not only military action. It's also action in informational space. And victims of this Ukrainian events was was not only Ukraine as a state, it also was society. It was inhabitants of Crimea. And 4 years ago, we saw how propaganda was used as a tool to influence, to direct influence in a very specific armed operation. So here in Lithuania, in Baltic states, we was afraid because we have a very painful history and very painful relations with Russian Federation, with Soviet Union former, and so on and so on. So I think that this geopolitical situation made very big influence to our approach here. And when we're talking about media literacy, you could see this umbrella as a media literacy. It's about many things. But today in Lithuania, we're often talking about critical thinking, about how society could survive in this age of global information, in age of global disinformation. Because we could talk about age of global information, but today hot topics are fake news, disinformation, propaganda, etc., etc., etc. And this is, in fact, this is context where we are here in Lithuania. So this is boring part, because about research, summer 2017 of 20 experts, of course, from Lithuania, not from. It was deep quality interviews and experts from different fields of knowledge. It's media, NGOs, academia, Lithuanian experts, and it was also few people from governmental institutions. And questions was how we could improve this level of resilience in society. And here I am presenting just part of this research. In fact, all information about research was already published. If you are interested in the end of the presentation, you could find my email and you could ask me the full text of all research about this region. This region is Baltic states, Visegrad countries, Visegrad 4, also Ukraine, Belarus, and few more countries. So I tried here present this made ranking of measures which experts mentioned in these conversations, and you could see that the most popular measure which experts mentioned was integrated. We should integrate media literacy to the schools. Also, second place was also about education. First of all, experts in Lithuania were thinking about education, and second was about informal media literacy, informal media literacy education. In fact, because not only schools matters, but and not only people in the schools matters, but for example, the big challenge about media literacy and about critical thinking, it's not in this group of young people, but in group of adults and in group of quite old people. It's also a big problem. There are some standard measures to encourage people to use different sources of information, of course, and very important, from my point of view, very important area, it's mass media and role of mass media. So Also, experts mentioned that it should be support of media quality and quality journalism, because when we're talking about challenge of fake news, it's about inequality of media, of mass media, first of all. Also, media could debunking, making a debunking of propagandist narratives, and in Lithuania, media is quite good in this field. Also, it was as a measure was mentioned that mass media should analyze mass media. What it means, mass media should talk about quality of mass media, because it's not enough to be also only quality media, but you should talk about what quality media means. And unfortunately, the last position was only 2 experts mentioned. It's use games for media education. But from my point of view, maybe this use games for media education, it's future, I hope. So, and I tried draw a model. I'm not artist, sorry. But in fact, what I figure out from this research, that when we're talking about media literacy, we should talk about 2 spheres. One of education, it's traditional sphere, but not only youth education, but adults education. And maybe adults education, it's, I mentioned, but maybe it's much more important in this sphere. And also sphere of media, and here I mean mass media, journalism, because quality media means that society gets good news, not good news, but real news, not fake news. Also, special platforms and projects to debunking narratives of propaganda. And for example, in Lithuania, the main news portals have such kind of projects. It's, for example, 15 minutes, it's second popular news, internet news media in Lithuania. They have patikrinta 15 minutes, means it's fact-checking initiative. And Delphi, it's most popular, have this demaskuota, it's unmasked, and it's about propaganda. It's more about propaganda. So this model, I think it could be useful, but unfortunately it's theoretical model. I could not say that here in Lithuania we have this model. It's wishful model, and we are late. In this age of propaganda, of disinformation, of fake news, we are already late. But maybe this model will be nearest future of Lithuania and maybe Baltic states, but not only Baltic states, because if we know this issue of propaganda, challenge of propaganda, but today all world talking about this challenge. So, and academically some conclusions that information challenge are extending, I think, not only changing but extending role of media literacy. Media literacy is part of our psychological munition, or information munition. And of course, media literacy is not only about education, but also about mass media too, and about quality of mass media. And we should be strong. Thank you.
Let's see if this is good. So we have a number of perspectives, and kind of to finish up, let's kind of summarize some of the things that we've been hearing before. I think the theme of MIL cities is kind of an undercurrent throughout here, because it really means that we are all responsible for media and information. And so right now we're talking about disinformation as a lens. You know, we're still kind of getting the idea of what does it mean to be an informed, participatory leader, kind of a citizen. So, you know, you've seen that we've been talking about history and creation and different factors in education. And I think we're pretty clear now that when we're talking about fake news, we're talking about deliberate, published disinformation, hoaxes, we used to call them lies, where people know the truth and they are publicizing something else. And there are a lot of variations, you know, on that. An image can be cropped so it's not fake, but it can be misleading information. So we're when we talk about fake news, it is a deliberate act. And we've talked already about how it's situated with a number of different kinds of literacies. And as we're seeing over the years, over the centuries, we always talk about literacy, but what that means in terms of how we negotiate an information environment changes. So the definition has to change accordingly. But this is one schematic in terms of how these different aspects can interrelate. And we have specifically, you know, also addressed specifically just this afternoon in terms of media literacy in terms of how messages are constructed, for whom, by whom, for what agenda, and how the format itself impacts that message. And to a little extent, we've talked about advertisements, we've talked about clickbait, we've talked about how media, especially fake news, really pulls on the emotions. So in this image, you know, what are we selling here? It's a car, right? And so we have looked at some of those emotional appeals, and particularly, you know, fear has been one, but there's lots of different methods. And quite frankly, I think this is another kind of implicit statement that the media outlets probably know a lot more about us than we know about media outlets. So there's a little power imbalance here that we should be able to rebalance. So here we are. Fear, facts, status, and this is an ad from the 50s that I don't think we could show anymore. They are selling a car, all right, a car. And we also have talked about that, you know, fake news has been around for a long time, from the cave person who drew, you know, who drew 17 elephants, and they really caught one rabbit. So each time that there's a new communication channel, you have that chance for fake news, all the way till now, and especially with social media, you know, the power, you know, base on who can spread that information and how quickly and how far. We've heard about that this afternoon and other times during this conference. And we've also talked about the different consequences of fake news. And I think one that really resonates recently is this issue of distrust. And how do we build that trust again? Because it does lead to poor actions. We've talked a bit about the creators, people doing it to influence, to have power, for fun, risking, and money. And the money issue, I think, was very well delineated. Does tend to be male-oriented in terms of the creators, for whatever reason. And that we've looked at what the situation is now in terms of consuming fake news and media in general, that online resources are considered just as credible as what we call now offline, that there's different responses to it, but more fundamentally, what you see first, it's harder to unlearn and than to start you know, fresh, and that the more that we hear certain messages, we start to believe them, And the deeper we hold certain beliefs, then the more defensive we get when we hear contradictory messages, and fake news is part of it. We've mentioned this afternoon in particular about youth engagement, and some of their senses of distrust, information fatigue, and yet when we know that students who engage in internet use will actually exchange ideas more and can be more involved, particularly in social issues that are important to them. However, they have a difficulty in terms of critically talking in public discourse. So part of our information and media literacy is giving them those tools so that they can speak credibly, you know, with strong evidence. And I think that our speakers at St. Andrews are really good examples of that, so that they can have not only a voice, but that they will be listened to. So this is just, you know, some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of education practices, you know, today. Those of you who know Hamilton, one of the songs is "I'm not throwing away my shot," and we still are in situations where MIL is not embedded throughout, you know, the curriculum in terms of an integrated way, as, you know, we were proposing earlier, yes. But if nothing else, you know, helping to define what's fake news, what does it look like, what's the big deal about it, who can you trust, and to look through the whole articles, to trace the source, to look up, to look across different sources, again, another recommendation. And we've also talked about this, to look inside. What are your own beliefs? What are your own biases? Because we all have them. What are your own values? And what are triggers when you are kind of like caught with certain information? There's lots of activities that we've talked about. You know, this is, again, just a short list of it. So recognizing this material, reproducing it, creating real news, and looking at it from a lot of different perspectives, whether it's from history or science or language arts. And that we've also heard throughout this session and other sessions the idea of citizen journalism. Not that a quick course is going to make you a journalist, but the more that students understand how information is produced, how it's verified, what are the challenges that today's journalists have to deal with that speed requirement by the populace for information immediately. So the more that we can have those trusting mentorships, it's another way for youth to use their own assets and have their own inside information be validated, and that they can have an authentic audience and really make an impact. So in terms of curriculum, because we've talked about what we really need to have MIL education, here are some possible contents, you know, for it, different ways, you know, to look at it. And there are a lot of curriculum, you know, sources out there at this point, some really good ones. And there are also a lot of good library guides. That was another piece of information, is like, yes, talk to your librarians. And since I teach school librarianship, I have that bias. So one place, so that you don't have to look for a whole bunch of different places, this happens to be my lib guide on fake news that gives some background and how to discern it, different literacies, different activities, civic engagement, and the library's rule. And you don't have to do that long, awful, you know, URL. If you just do tiny URL, you ever heard of that? tinyurl.com, and just fake news lib guide, one word. Obviously, as a librarian, I have lots of references and research, but the idea is the truth is out there. We are part of the truth, and together we can provide counter stories that are the stories that can be shared with everyone. So thank you very much. And surprise, we have time for questions. Okay, perfect.
Thank you. I have a question for the people from St. Andrews. Very interesting presentation. I'm just wondering, what are your sources for all the facts or information you gave? I'm not going to call it facts because I'm not sure it's facts.
Yes, so I have a bibliography at request. I can find you afterwards and send them all to you by email. But
Thank you.
because we are pretty concerned with the topic, we've made a very good list.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, show me the evidence, right? Yes. Yes.
Okay. Can I make a question which is maybe totally irrelevant to Professor Sakamoto? It's because I know and I have seen that in Japan, map literacy is very much increased, and it's one very specific way of teaching visual literacy and structures. Do you know of any research that has correlated these two kind of fields? I mean, learning how we can structure a map and entering into the taxonomy of knowledge that has to be revealed, reinvented in the unstructured internet information, for example? Is there any such study? Do you know?
Yes. Yeah, in Japan we teach the reading map and structure of the map in geography from the primary school to the high school level. But in Japan, we don't seek the reading map as a visual literacy education. This is one problem because in Japan we have the national curriculum, but we don't have the concept of the media literacy, critical thinking skills in national curriculum. This is a big problem. We from the 2020 we have new national curriculum. The core concept of the new curriculum, national curriculum, is proactive learning and interactive learning. Just all, no critical thinking. This is a big problem. We have so many the reading map or construction or something, but we need add critical thinking skill. Yeah, we have to do in the education area.
I will say that in the United States, with the new International Society for Technology and Education Standards for students as well as for teachers, that there is one that's specifically on numeracy and more generally data analysis. All right. So how do you work, with data? And then that society has, publications that kind of back, that information, and they consider that as part of digital literacy, which is interesting. And then even in my website, I do have a section on numeracy and some articles and activities and curriculum on that. It's becoming more and more interesting, and it's going on beyond just like math and analyzing charts and visualization of information. But the librarians, especially school librarians, are really getting into that, and they have received federal grants for creating professional development for librarians, and for them then to work with teachers to make that happen in the classroom. So it's something that's been very undervalued, I think, and it's coming more to the fore. And I think part of the impetus has been the data mining and the big data, that kind of thing. So trying to find patterns it's what we're really talking about. Yeah, good question. Thank you. Yes. He's in good shape with all of the going around.
Thanks so much. So I'm curious, so we know that from research that a lot of the reason why disinformation works on people actually goes beyond skills, right? It has to do with emotions, with fast reactions, with things that happen actually much more quickly than our logic can catch up to. So I'm curious as to whether any of the participants is working in this area. So are you thinking about emotional responses, behavior change, about habit, to go together with those really important critical thinking skills?
Actually, this is exactly why we saw the necessity to create our project, because there isn't enough research across different departments, especially neuroscience, behavioral economics, and psychology. This is why we want to base our research at a university higher education institute that cooperates with other research centers. But yes, there's a big gap. Yeah.
Where I've seen it the most, and I've just done like meta-analyses, but not, you know, out in the field and real people. But I think other people have in this group is health information. And that's where I've seen the most. And there's differences developmentally in terms of the information behaviors and, you know, reasons for that and ways to deal with it. And what's very interesting is intermediaries is a really new big push, you know, for that. Questions? You're holding up well. I mean, it's the end of the day and going like, oh my goodness. And you know, there's another 45 minutes. So you do realize, you know, that there is a big finale at the end. So you have actually have 10 minutes if you want to talk with each other, stand up, breathe, get some fresh air. But they will be starting at, I don't know if it's on the hour or 5 minutes after the hour. Let me just check real fast. Okay, so it says 10 minutes after 6.